I begin with an. Can you hear me? I begin with an unconventional moment. On Sunday, I called Hanoch, one of the conference's co-organizers. I told him, Hanoch, I just had an operation. I just come out of the hospital. I am feeling a total wreck. I don't think I can come to the conference. He said, Alon, wait till Wednesday. So here I am, and happy to be able to deliver this talk. And I decided, by way of acknowledging this fact, rather than going to a synagogue and having the Kataguman interrupted by the Gabbai who's trying to figure out who's going to get the next Aliyah, to say the Kataguman here, because it's a community of study, of Torah Shabbat Peh, and if I was able to come out of hospital in order to be able to deliver this, what better opportunity to acknowledge this and give thanks to God. Hallelujah. Odeh Adonai b'chol levav, b'sod yesharim ve'eda, ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, הגומל לחייבים טובות, שיגמלן כל טוב. So I came out of hospital full of energy, and I've just run the Jonathan Sachs intellectual marathon. I am the last one in the marathon.
For today.
And there's a kind of ambivalence about being last in the marathon, because the last one in the marathon, so to speak, has lost the race. On the other hand, the last one has in fact succeeded in running the marathon, which is also an achievement. So what I suggest, therefore, is that given the fact that the official time for this conference is over, I declare the conference over, and let's just see this as an after party. I'll be sharing with you from a forthcoming book coming out in the Littman Library, titled Covenant and World Religions. Obviously the title Covenant and World Religions is an echo of Sachs. The book studies Sachs and Greenberg, echoed here previously by Tanya, and others, on their attitude to world religions and Jewish theology of religions. There are flyers out there for reduction. Anyone who survives this after party can get another 10%. And I will try to offer some insights on a question that was framed. What's the title of the talk?
Was Rabbi Sachs interested in other religions?
Was Rabbi Sachs interested in other religions? Which my cousin said, it's like asking whether the Pope is Catholic. So the question really is the question equivalent or not? And we can determine this in the space of the next 35 minutes, because this after party can now go on.
Oh. You'll get 20.
Oh.
As a matter of fact, they all took less than 20, but you'll get the full 20.
I guess I knew it didn't work. Okay. All right. I've already discussed this book, and we had a session on it as part of the World Congress of Jewish Studies. And some people thought I would repeat the paper I gave there. I'm not going to repeat the paper I gave there. I will, however, signal some of the points that arose in that particular conversation. I discussed at the session the question of how, in fact, while being a champion of interfaith relations, Sachs actually avoids engagement with the specific content of other religions. He does not cite sources of other faiths. There's a level of engagement of other religions that comes with a certain kind of interfaith that he didn't practice advocating an alternative, and I'm not going to repeat that talk here. Both that talk and this talk are part of the forthcoming book. I explored the reasons for it, one of which is ideological. Is this due to Soloveitchik? And I ruled against that possibility. I favored a psychological reading, going to his particular temperament, his biography, his personality, what he felt comfortable, and how within the limits of his personal comfort he went much farther than one might have expected in creating new patterns for interfaith engagement, while nevertheless avoiding a certain kind of engagement. I'm going to illustrate this just with one quote and a brief reflection, and then move into the body of today's presentation. So here's the quote. I have to say, imagine Sachs, I have to say, although, may I mention the Archbishop of Canterbury, or is it just one for public consumption? It all, shall we say, that the Archbishop of Canterbury at the moment, like his predecessors, with whom I work very closely, George Carey and Rowan Williams, so Justin Welby is actively engaged in trying to do this right now, to bring religious leaders, take them out of the conflict zone, because once you're in the conflict zone, you know, tempers flare. Just take them out. Get them not necessarily to agree on anything, but get them to become friends, because sometimes when religious leaders, when Jews and Muslim and Christian leaders come together with a very inflamed population, but they are seen to be standing together, that can send a very powerful message on the street. And sometimes to do that, you have to take time now to create friendships that will be warm enough to be able to use when you need them. It's just taking early action to create this. Here's the quote. Sachs's interest in interfaith are on the whole civic. He harnesses religion to address present-day global challenges, religious violence and tension, and the legitimate place of religious and cultural diversity are his concerns. Notable is The Home We Build. Time and again in that book, one notes in this work how in counterclass religion, the relationships constructed among religious leaders are important for their civic benefits, for the peace, law, and order they bring to society, not for the spiritual or pedagogic value they might carry in and of themselves. As a result, all appeal to religion plays down the specifically religious potential of an encounter and features its civic benefits instead. When religious leaders gather or appear in public together, rather than recognize the religious dimensions of the encounter and its broader promise, the civic elements are prioritized at the expense of the religious dimension. Conscious avoidance of the religious dimension of the encounter is complemented by the recommendation for side-by-side common action that serves society, rather than the more direct and dialogically related activities that are characterized as face-to-face. In a word, and I think this is true of his entire oeuvre, concerning interreligious thought, Sachs's interest is not in religions. It is in the members of the religion. It is not in the faith. It is in the human person, the image of God, who is part of that. This is not just a matter of Sachs's theory, I believe. This is actually how he practiced it. It is a practice that privileges people, friendship, and contribution to society over engaging the content and substance of other religions in their difference. Yet, Sachs's thought contains a vision that is far broader than his own practice, and I'd like to explore that tension here. As I argued in the talk in the summer, in many ways, Sachs allows us to do as he says, not as he does. He opens a path by virtue of his ideas, even if not by virtue of his personal example. So I'd like to explore this tension as it emerges from some of his writings. Sachs is broadly considered a champion of interfaith relations. Chava Tirosh Samuelson, who I learned yesterday was the one person that Sachs had wanted to take part in this particular conference, a brilliant author. Her most recent brilliant piece of writing is the blurb she wrote for my forthcoming book. And she's a savvy, discerning professor of Jewish philosophy. She devoted the volume to Sachs that she spoke about earlier today when she presented her presentation. It is worth noting how she perceives of Sachs based on the dignity of difference and other sources that inform my own presentation. Chava relates that in his work, Sachs makes the bold claim that to face the pressing challenges of our time, we need not only the great religious traditions, but a way to bring their wisdom into dialogue with one another. Bring their wisdom into dialogue with one another. In other words, rather than the alternative emphasis of all religions contributing their respective wisdom for the benefit of society, Sachs, in her understanding, is a proponent of a direct exchange of wisdom between religions in the interest of society's pressing needs. Similarly, according to her, Sachs teaches that each tradition needs to find, not simply tolerate, the positive value in the diversity of the other. We just heard about it. Note, Tirosh does not refer to legitimating diversity as a principle, but to the active quest to identify the positive value in the diversity that is particular to another tradition. This would involve a process of mutual study, interrogation, listening, and sharing. In similar vein, she attributes to Sachs the claim that since all humans are created in God's image, we must see the beauty and wisdom in faiths not our own. While she's able to offer references in support of these views, Sachs never develops these flashes of inspiration into more detailed expositions, let alone into a program. More importantly, he provides no modeling for a path that might be attributed to him. Sachs's brilliant formulations are rich with potential. The message she hears may well be the core of his message, but it is not a message that he in fact acts on. So let's explore how this finds expression in the books. I begin with Dignity of Difference. The heart of the issue is the relation between the universal and the particular, what religions share in common and the differences that set them apart. Sachs has established an important balance between the two, by means of which particularity and difference are appreciated alongside universality and commonality. However, what Sachs has left unresolved is the question of whether we appreciate the other for what is common or for what is different. Granted, Sachs has devised a structure that validates and calls for respective difference. However, is acceptance ultimately contingent on commonality? And if so, is difference tolerated, legitimated, or is it a source of further inspiration and enrichment across the divide established by difference? If otherness, the actual difference, is not really engaged, then we are left with a superficial view of the other that makes no room for genuine encounter. While it may suffice for a distant recognition and acceptance of the other, it certainly cannot provide a foundation for real relationships that engage the fullness of individuals or communities in their particularity. Superficial engagement cannot deliver the depth of healing that is sought in interreligious relations. The structure of Sachs's thought points to learning and enrichment across religions as the fruit of appreciating particularity and valuing difference. In fact, Sachs is explicit in his call for learning across religions, while never speaking against it in any work. This emphasis is already found early in his work, before the Dignity of Difference. One of the earliest occurrences, Tradition and Non-Traditional Age. In an essay there he speaks of the multiplicity of languages, Tower of Babel, and then he finishes the discussion of Tower of Babel by saying, learning one another's language of faith is one of the ways we reach back before Babel. Beautiful word. Learning one another's language of faith is one of the ways we reach back before Babel. And yet, as the essay here unfolds, Sachs moves the discussion from actual engagement of the other's faith to the common moral message that Jews and Christians have to offer society at large. This transition encapsulates the phenomenon that I described. A potential breadth of theological vision is channeled into ethical and civic concerns to which multiple religions contribute, while avoiding the very kind of dialogue and vision in light of his biblical idea. Let's look at dignity of difference. There are two fundamental strategies for affirming difference, and these correspond to the two versions of dignity of difference. First version presents a diversity that's rooted in God. In its most extreme form, it spoke of God relating to religions as revelation. It also referred to other religions as the human calling out to God and of recognizing God's image. Second edition shifted the grounds for justifying diversity. Against the common background of the Noahide laws, it spoke of human and cultural diversity, grounding diversity in the human person rather than in God. This is in line with Sachs's major emphasis on the centrality of the image of God as a core message of Torah, and one that also conditions the attitude to different religions. Now, is the purpose of Sachs's construct simply to affirm as legitimate the existence of other religions? Or does such affirmation amount to an invitation to engage with them in reciprocal processes of learning and spiritual sharing? There are different ways the argument could be made. I'm not going to look at all sides. I just want to put one side of the argument that shows that if you look at his argument, the consequence should have been engaging other religions, a conclusion not reached by him or not practiced. So, version one. If diversity is truly God-given and has its roots in God, then this amounts to an invitation to engage the religion of the other. The fullness of God finds expression in the fullness of religious paths. Judaism's challenge, as Sachs states, is not to find God within itself, but to find him in the other. If we seek the fullness of God, then potentially there's something to receive in every religion. If in the process of affirming the validity of other religions, Sachs suggests that all religions are needed to reveal the fullness of God, then he's also suggesting that no one religion can bring one to fullness of knowledge of God. So something will remain beyond one's comprehension, contained in the other's religion. Now let's look at the alternative method. The ground for religious diversity lie in the human person and humanity's religious aspirations. So you could say that a God grounding of religious diversity amounts to an invitation to share across religions, to discover the riches of God, while grounding diversity in the human person would limit such engagement. Human diversity requires multiple approaches to God, but these stem from the inbuilt diversity of the human race.
Well, I guess not going to show diversity and respect here.
Given this, after a long day, nobody else can mind it. Given this diversity, there's no need for one. Given this diversity, there's no need for one part of humanity to follow in the spiritual ways of another, emerging as they are from this prior diversity. The argument would seem to hold, but still holds the possibility of inspiration across religion. If you recognize the fullness of humanity, its very diversity, and all the more so if you consider this diversity an expression of the ideal of God's image in humanity, then in fact, getting to know another spiritual path could also be seen as a way of delving more deeply into our humanity. I don't think Sachs ever argues that the common Noahide foundations exhaust our common humanity. He calls for the dignity of difference. He is in fact urging us to appreciate the other precisely for the other's particularity. Grounding such particularity in the diversity of humanity, casting the image of God, could lead us to a quest to understand more deeply all that makes us human. Without the depths of human aspirations to God as they find full expression in religious diversity. 1 second, I need to talk to you. I just want my 20 minutes. It's always like 20 minutes. We're not even close.
Okay, so you're finishing at 7.
I'll finish on 20 minutes after this. In many statements, Sachs gives a clear indication of the ideal of mutual learning, sharing inspiration. These statements push us further to consider the relationship between his theoretical inspirational saying and his own practices. Listen to these beautiful quotes. Each culture has something to contribute. Each person knows something no one else does. The sages said, who is wise? One who learns from all men. The wisest is not one who knows himself wiser than others. He is one who knows all men have some share of the truth and is willing to learn from them. For none of us knows all the truth, and each one of us knows some of it. So willingness to learn from others is a sign of wisdom. The search for truth or for wisdom passes through the study of other religions. The same applies to calls as the following. Can we hear the voice of God in a language, a sensibility, a culture not our own? Sachs seems to be inviting us to actually listen to God's voice through the particularity of the other's culture and religion. In this line of reasoning, mutual enrichment is the positive outcome of appreciating indifference. So, while the theory is set in place, one must ask, does Sachs exemplify it in a cut of paragraph that repeats the same idea in 7 different ways? So the answer to me is that he does not exemplify it. He does not implement the idea, and to a large extent, he deflects from it. His role, and let me quote the conclusion of Tehillah Fractured Work. This has been a religious book, a Jewish book. Each of us has a contribution, whether we are religious or secular, Jewish, Christian, Muslim, whether we represent the great non-Western traditions or more modern forms of spirituality. All of us part to do this book is to articulate one voice in the conversation, knowing that no human voice can express the totality of wisdom, that there is none from which we cannot learn. But who is the this who we cannot learn? We sitting in the classroom? Certainly. The world at large? Certainly. But Sachs himself is the teacher. He's the one who brings the Jewish voice to others. I'm unable to find in his work any occasion in which he's implementing the call that he's issuing to listen to the other, to integrate the wisdom of the other, to make that part of his message. He is the great teacher. He's not necessarily a great learner of religions. And here the great question arises, how is it that this genius of a man, who was a walking encyclopedia, what Josh narrated earlier from the talks with Joanna, makes it even more prominent. In other words, he knows everything, but he doesn't seem to know the religions. He knows philosophy, he knows contemporary social thought, he knows pop culture, he knows everything, but doesn't know religions. When you look what religions are, the most superficial presentations of other religions. I'm not going to go into this right now. Where is this gap coming from, and why is it not implemented? So I'm going to skip an entire page, and I'm going to conclude with section. Yeah, I can do it. I'm going to conclude with a section on how I see what is ultimately his approach to God, his spirituality, and why I think that he could envision something that he didn't himself implement. What is it that really prevents Sachs from the kind of engagement he is perfectly capable of imagining? I'd like to suggest that at the root of it is a deeper reservation with regards to theology, religious experience, and how God is known. The root of Sachs's hesitancy, if we may refer to it thus, may go to the very foundation of how he knows God and how he affirms religion, both within Judaism and in relation to the other. If so, the unfulfilled potential may be accounted for in terms that straddle psychology and epistemology. We might refer to it as his particular spirituality. He knows God in very particular ways, and those ways either preclude or make it unnecessary to engage the depth of the religious experience and knowledge of the other, whom Sachs seeks to affirm. Here's the passage. People within the Abrahamic monotheisms have always known that for most of us, most of the time, God, more infinite than the universe, older and younger than time, cannot be known directly. He is known mainly through his effects, and of these, the most important is his effect on human lives. That is what I sensed on meeting Lubavitcher Rebbe and Rabbi Soloveitchik. In them it was obvious. It is why they commanded so much respect within the American Jewish community. But over the years, I have learned to find it so much more widely in communities that care, in the kindness of strangers, in people who touch our lives, perhaps only momentarily, doing the deed or saying the word that carries us to safety across the abyss of loneliness or self-doubt. It is where I find God in Jewish history. There's a grandeur, a nobility, a heroic passion about Jews that does not seem to come naturally to this fractious, quarrelsome, stiff-necked people. But you have to be very narrow indeed not to see beauty and wisdom in faiths other than your own. I've been inspired by seeking Sikhs offering hospitality to the poor in Amritsar, Christians building homes for the homeless throughout the world, Hindus practicing sewa, that's service, compassion to the distressed, by the majestic wisdom of the great Chinese Confucian Taoist traditions, and the courage of the many Muslims I know who fight the extremists in their own communities. The statement that every human being is in God's image precedes both the universal covenant with Noah and the particular with Abraham, to tell us that our humanity precedes our religious identity, whatever that identity may be. And now the final paragraph. On the face of it, this is a very open and outgoing quote. It relates not only to Abrahamic religions, but to others. I note especially the reference to Sikhs, made in Amritsar, a visit I had the honor to facilitate myself, who remembers that, that has left a deep enough impression upon Sachs to figure here and elsewhere. Yet what this passage relates to us is that Sachs is neither a mystic nor a philosopher in the old sense. God is not known to him directly, experientially, mystically. He's known to him in and through people. This is as true of the two great teachers who shaped his life and set him on his path, as it is of the many religious leaders and communities he met along the way. In both cases, God is known through the image of God. The human person takes precedence in experiential and ultimately theoretical terms over God as direct object of relationship and knowledge. The shift from God to God image is, in this new insight, not simply a matter of compromising the radical views of the dignity of difference. It goes to the core of Sachs's spirituality. It is a spirituality that passes through the human person and human relations. From this perspective, the kinds of ideals that Sachs set forth as worthy of appreciation in members of other religions and ideals that make mutual study and encounter mostly superfluous, make sense in their own way. Thank you very much.